On a frozen winter night in a small, forgotten mountain town, a little girl steps out of a grocery store with nothing but a bag of cheap bread, a wounded leg, and a broken heart. Walking beside her is a German shepherd bleeding with every step, yet refusing to leave her side. She does not know it yet. But this night will decide whether she survives or disappears forever. What happened between that child, the injured dog, and the police officer who chose to stop his car will change all of their lives forever. Before the story begins, tell me where you are watching from and leave it in the comments. Your city, your state, your country. I would love to know. And if you believe stories of hope, courage, and second chances deserve to be shared, please press subscribe now to support the channel and help us bring more real miracles to the world. Snow did not simply fall in Frost Willow. It settled over the little mountain city like an old story that refused to end. The town lay cupped between dark pine ridges, its narrow streets twisting between modest houses whose roofs sagged under the weight of too many winters. Street lamps glowed in soft halos, their light swallowed and reshaped by the swirling flakes, humming quietly as if whispering to one another about the people passing underneath. On this night, the wind came down from the hills in sharp gusts, carrying ice and chimney smoke, scraping along windows and rattling loose shutters. Most families had already surrendered to the storm, curtains drawn, doors bolted, pretending nothing important ever happened after dark. But the world did not ask for permission when it chose the moment to change a life. At the corner of Alder and 3rd, an old grocery store called Willow Mart hunched between taller brick buildings like a tired animal trying to stay out of the wind. Its paint had peeled in long curls, and one of its front windows was permanently fogged, trapped under a thin film of age and neglect. Inside, narrow aisles were stacked with cheap canned goods, bags of rice, and discount cereal boxes whose cartoon mascots had faded from too many years under fluorescent lights. The air smelled faintly of coffee, old bread, and impatience. Behind the counter stood Mr. Hanley, the owner, late 60s, a little overweight, with rounded shoulders and a neck that seemed to sink into his collar, as though the world were always a bit too heavy. His thinning gray hair lay stubbornly against his skull, and his small, sharp eyes followed every movement with the careful suspicion of someone who had been shortchanged one too many times. Somewhere in the distant past, he might have wanted to be generous, but time and disappointment had worn that impulse down to a habit of counting every penny twice. He slid a few wrinkled bills into the register as the door creaked open and the bell above it gave a half-hearted jingle. In the doorway, framed by the harsh light of the store and the spinning white outside, stood a girl who looked too small for the winter she was standing in. Lily stepped out onto the cracked concrete, shoulders hunched against the cold that immediately reached for the thin places in her clothing. She was 9 years old, short and slight, with the kind of hollowness in her cheeks that came from more skipped meals than she would ever mention out loud. Her coat was a faded green thing 2 sizes too big. The sleeves rolled clumsily at the wrists, the zipper catching halfway up, as if even it was tired. Dark brown hair escaped from under a gray knit hat, falling in uneven strands around a narrow, pale face. Her eyes, gray-blue like ice covering deep water, were too alert for a child, constantly flicking from shadow to shadow, as if she had long ago understood that danger did not always come with warning sounds. In her right hand, she clutched a flimsy plastic grocery bag so tightly the handles bit into her skin. Inside were the kinds of items chosen by someone counting coins, not calories. A loaf of discounted white bread, a single can of chicken noodle soup with a dent in its side, and a small packet of generic cheese slices. To anyone else, it would have looked pathetic. To Lily, it was precious, a fragile proof that tonight there would be something to eat for her, and for the one who mattered even more to her than she did to herself. Her right leg was wrapped from knee to ankle in layered bandages, some bright white, some already tinged with dull red, where the wound beneath had bled through. The injury pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat, a hot, dragging ache that made the ground tilt slightly with each step. She leaned on a wooden crutch that was clearly homemade, a length of sanded lumber, just uneven enough to have its own personality, with a folded towel tied at the top to pad her underarm. Every time she shifted her weight, the wood creaked and her muscles tightened. She did not make a sound. In Lily's world, pain was weather. You noticed it, adjusted your steps, and kept walking. At her side moved Ranger. The German shepherd stayed so close his fur brushed the back of her coat as they stepped out into the storm, as if he were stitching himself to her shadow to make sure it could never slip away. He was just past 2 years old, built strong and balanced, with powerful shoulders and a broad chest beneath his thick sable coat. Black and tan fur blended into the night so that the snow landing on him looked like scattered stars on worn armor. A tiny notch in his left ear marked the memory of some earlier injury, healed but not forgotten. His eyes, deep amber and steady, studied every shifting light and distant noise with the seriousness of a sentinel who expected trouble and had no intention of letting it pass unchecked. Tonight, Ranger's front right leg was wrapped in a torn strip of an old t-shirt, bound tightly around a gash that had bled through in dark, ugly patches. Each time he set that paw on the icy sidewalk, a faint tremor ran up his shoulder. He bore it without complaint, simply adjusting his gait so that his body stayed slightly between Lily and anything the world might decide to throw at her. To Ranger, the hierarchy of the universe was simple and absolute. Lily first, then everything else. Behind them, the grocery door snicked shut, closing out a square of light. "Don't stand there all night," Mr. Hanley's voice grumbled from inside, muffled by glass. "Door lets in the cold." There was no farewell, no be careful getting home, just the clack of the lock turning and the soft dimming of the store's neon flicker. Lily watched the door for half a heartbeat, her breath flowing out in thin white streams, then adjusted her grip on the bag and stepped away from the small shelter of the overhang. The wind caught her immediately, slipping icy fingers under her, collar tugging at the edges of her hat. She set the crutch down carefully, testing each patch of sidewalk before trusting it with her weight. Ranger moved in perfect sync, his injured leg mirroring hers, every step a quiet insistence that they would get through this together. Frost willows stretched ahead of them in a patchwork of sloping roads and modest homes, their windows glowing dimly through the storm. A few houses still held onto their Christmas lights, even though the holidays were nearly over, colored bulbs glowing stubbornly against the dark like small acts of rebellion. Smoke curled from chimneys into the heavy sky, where clouds hung low enough to feel oppressive, as though the whole town were being pressed down into itself. Somewhere in the distance a dog barked once, sharp and lonely, then fell silent again. On the other side of town, a police cruiser rolled slowly along an icy street, its tires crunching over packed snow. Inside, Officer Evan Brooks sat behind the wheel, his gloved hands resting lightly at 10 and 2. He was 34, tall and broad-shouldered, with the type of steady posture that made his uniform look crisp even at the end of a long shift. Short dark hair framed a face that might have seemed stern at first glance, but closer looked more tired than severe, with faint lines at the corners of his blue-gray eyes where laughter and worry had taken turns over the years. His skin carried a light brown warmth that hinted at a childhood spent in sunnier places before life had steered him into colder ones. In Frost Willow, people knew him as the quiet officer, the one who listened more than he talked, offered warnings when he could, and tickets only when he had no choice, the one who somehow made frightened people breathe a little easier just by standing nearby and not rushing them. He had a reputation for patience and a habit of showing up to the smallest calls as if they mattered as much as the big ones. What most of the town did not know, and what he seldom let himself dwell on, was that a different life had once stood waiting for him. A nursery with untouched furniture, whispered arguments in a kitchen, the sharp ache of something hoped for and then lost. The echo of that life lingered in small ways, the silence of his one-bedroom apartment above the laundromat, the way he always noticed children walking alone, the way he kept a stack of unread parenting pamphlets in a drawer he never opened. Tonight, the dispatcher had told him this would likely be his last sweep before heading home. "Storm's keeping things quiet," the voice over the radio had said. "Do your loop and call it a night." Quiet, Evan knew, did not always mean safe. As he turned onto Maple Row, the cruiser's headlights cut a pale tunnel through the falling snow. His wipers swished back and forth, the heater hummed and rattled, and the town slid past in muted shades of gray and white. He was already thinking about the cup of instant noodles, waiting in his cupboard and the book he wouldn't really read before falling asleep to the dull hum of the laundromat machines downstairs. Then he saw them. At first it was just movement in the distance, two small shapes half swallowed by the white, one upright and uncertain, the other lower to the ground, pressed close. As the cruiser eased closer, the shapes sharpened into a girl in an oversized coat, struggling with a wooden crutch, and a German shepherd limping at her side, his body angled protectively toward her. The girl's head was bowed against the wind. The dog's eyes flashed in the headlights for a second, bright and watchful. Evan's attention snapped into focus. A child out in this weather, on foot, after dark. An injured dog. Training ran its familiar checklist in his head. Age, visible injuries, environment, possible dangers. But beneath the neat mental boxes and procedures, something older and less tidy stirred. A quiet, stubborn part of him that still believed showing up could change the ending of someone's story. For a few seconds, he kept driving. It was the simple human kind of hesitation. The instinct to stay on the straight line home, to tell himself he could just log this in, call another unit, let someone else be the one who stepped into this unknown. The girl and the dog slipped out of his headlights and into the glow of his rearview mirror. In the glass, he watched her nearly lose her footing on an icy patch, the grocery bag swinging wildly. The dog shifted closer, his shoulder bumping her leg to steady her, tail low but unbroken. Snow thickened around them, trying to erase their outlines. Evan's jaw tightened, his fingers flexed once against the steering wheel. Inside the warm bubble of the cruiser, it would have been easy to pretend that he had not seen enough to be responsible. But he had seen. A limp, a bleeding animal, a child alone in a storm, and he knew too well what it felt like to wish, years later, that you had turned around when you still had the chance. The red glow of his brake lights flared across the snow as he slowed the car to a near stop. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. The wipers paused mid-swing, the wind dipped, the radio fell silent. Outside, the figures in his mirror blurred at the edges, still moving forward, still alone. Evan let out a long, quiet sigh that fogged the inside of the windshield. "All right," he murmured into the empty cabin, half to himself, half to a god he wasn't sure still listened. "We're doing this." His hand turned the wheel. The cruiser slipped into reverse. Headlights swung back across the empty street and reached once more for the two small figures pushing their way through the winter. The snow continued to fall, not only on the tired roofs and cracked sidewalks of Frost Willow, but gently, insistently, into the unwritten chapters of three lives about to collide. A girl who had run out of safe places, a dog who refused to abandon her, and an officer who had almost convinced himself that his heart was done taking risks. The patrol car slowed beside them, with the hush of tires on snow. Blue and white paint ghosted through the storm. Lily's breath caught in her throat, as if the cold had suddenly found its way into her lungs. Fear did not arrive loudly in her. It slipped in quietly, the way it always had, pressing behind her eyes, stiffening her shoulders, reminding her of rules learned through pain. Do not trust, do not linger, do not let them take you back. Her fingers tightened around the plastic grocery bag until it creaked. Ranger felt the change in her body instantly. His head lifted, ears angling forward despite the sting in his wounded leg. His body slid closer to Lily, instinctively repositioning so that his broad chest formed a living wall between her and the approaching car. Snow dusted his muzzle and lashes, melting into tiny silver beads. His breathing was heavier now, rougher, each inhale rasping softly through clenched teeth, but the quiet warning in his chest still formed, a low vibration of resolve rather than aggression. Officer Evan Brooks stepped out of the cruiser slowly, boots pressing into the snow with deliberate care. Up close, under the cold glow of the street lamp, he seemed taller than before, the width of his shoulders making the falling flakes look even smaller by comparison. His uniform was dusted white along the hems. His breath rose in steady clouds. His face, though tired, carried no sharpness now, only caution and a restrained gentleness, like a man approaching something that could either break or be broken depending on how he moved. "Hey," he said softly, palms open at his sides. "You're not in trouble." Lily shook her head once, sharply, as if rejecting the words before they could reach her heart. She took a step backward. The crutch slipped on the ice with a dry wooden scrape. The world tilted, time compressed into a single, weightless second where her body forgot how to balance. She fell. The grocery bag flew from her hand. Bread burst free, rolling across the snow in soft, shapeless lumps. A can of soup bounced once and vanished beneath the drifting white. But Lily did not hit the ground. Ranger surged forward with a sudden, painful burst of motion, planting his injured leg despite the tearing agony that ripped through muscle and skin. His body took the impact. The sound that left him was not a whine. It was the kind of broken, strangled breath that only comes when pain is swallowed instead of released. Lily landed against his shoulder, face pressed into his thick, cold fur. "Ranger," she whispered, her voice breaking into something dangerously close to sound. Evan was beside them in seconds. He dropped to one knee in the snow, carefully keeping his hands visible, his movements slow enough not to spook either the child or the dog. Up close, the injuries were impossible to ignore. Lily's bandages were soaked through. Ranger's leg was trembling violently now, blood seeping fresh through the makeshift. Rap. Evan's stomach tightened. "It's okay," he murmured. "I've got you." Lily's eyes darted to his badge, to the radio clipped at his chest, to the heavy authority stitched into his coat. Panic flared fully now, sudden and wild. She twisted violently in Ranger's hold and stumbled to her feet, dragging the dog with her. "No!" she cried. "We're fine. We're going home. Don't take us." Her words came out fast and breathless, tangled together by fear. She turned and tried to run. She made it exactly 2 steps before her injured leg buckled again. The crutch skidded away. She pitched forward once more. This time Ranger could not fully catch her. He collapsed partially with her, both of them sinking into the snow in a heap of limbs and fur. Ranger did not growl. He did not snap. He only pulled himself upright enough to wedge his body over Lily's as best he could, shielding her from the cold ground and from Evan both. His eyes locked onto the officers, amber and unwavering. Evan stayed where he was. "You don't have to go anywhere you don't want to," he said quietly. "I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to help." Lily stared at him through wet lashes, chest heaving. "You'll take me back?" she whispered. "They always do." Evan felt the words hit something deep and old inside him. He didn't argue. He didn't promise anything he couldn't control. "Right now," he said instead, "you're hurt, and so is your dog. That's all that matters." Lily shook her head again, more desperately. "Ranger got hurt because of me." Her voice dropped to nearly nothing. "He was protecting me." That single sentence, small, fragile, and heavy with meaning, hung in the frozen air between them. Evan glanced at the dog's wound, then at the girl's bandaged leg. The pattern was not subtle. "Who did this to you?" he asked gently. Lily's lips pressed together. She shook her head once more, violently, as if the truth were something she could physically force back into silence. "Please," she whispered, "please just leave us." Snow continued to fall around them in thick, slow layers. The world felt muffled, insulated, as though everything beyond this small circle under the streetlight had been pushed far away. Evan exhaled slowly through his nose. "I can't," he said. "Not like this." He rose carefully to his feet and moved toward his cruiser. Lily panicked instantly. "No!" she cried, struggling to stand again, dragging Ranger. Evan turned back to her immediately. "I'm not leaving," he said firmly. "I'm getting the car closer so you don't have to walk anymore." He eased the cruiser forward until its headlights washed over them fully, warm beams cutting through the storm. Then he returned, this time holding a thick emergency blanket from the trunk. He draped it first over Ranger's shoulders, then around Lily, tucking it gently as though she might shatter if he moved too fast. Lily flinched at his touch but didn't pull away. Exhaustion was beginning to bleed through her fear. Evan lifted the fallen crutch and handed it back to her. "What's your name?" he asked. Silence. Ranger shifted slightly under the blanket, pressing his side more firmly into her legs. "His name is Ranger," she said at last, almost involuntarily. Evan nodded. "Good name." He waited. After a long moment, she whispered, "Lily." "Nice to meet you, Lily." He gestured toward the open back door of the cruiser. "Let me take you somewhere warm so we can look at those injuries." Lily hesitated. The interior of the car looked impossibly bright and clean compared to the chaos of the street. Too official. Too dangerous. "I can't go back," she said again. "I won't." Evan crouched slightly so his eyes were level with hers. "You don't have to talk about anything you don't want to," he said. "You don't have to go back anywhere tonight. Just let me get you both out of this storm." The wind picked up sharply, driving needles of ice into Lily's face. Ranger shuddered beneath the blanket. His breathing had grown shallow. Lily looked down at him. Her decision was not made for herself. It was made for the one who could no longer afford her hesitation. She nodded once. Evan lifted Ranger with careful effort, supporting his injured leg, and helped Lily into the back seat beside him. She immediately curled toward the dog, one small hand pressed against his rib cage, counting his breaths as if they were the only steady thing left in the world. The cruiser pulled away from the streetlight and into the storm. They drove only a few minutes to the temporary Frost Willow police substation, a converted municipal office that glowed dimly against the snow. Inside, warmth wrapped around them with sudden heaviness. Lily swayed on her feet as Evan helped her out. Ranger was carried in on a stretcher borrowed from the station's medical corner. The smell of antiseptic filled the air. Lily's eyes darted to every door, every uniform. "I don't have to say anything," she whispered. Evan nodded. "You don't." A volunteer medic knelt beside Ranger and began the first careful examination. Blood loss was significant. The wound was deep. Lily watched every movement with rigid intensity. When the medic reached for scissors to cut away the torn cloth around Ranger's leg, Lily stiffened instantly and grabbed his fur. "Don't hurt him," she pleaded. The medic, a woman in her 40s with calm eyes and streaks of gray in her hair, gave Lily a gentle smile. "I won't, I promise." Lily did not release her grip until Ranger's paw rested again against her knee. Evan crouched beside her. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. "Bringing him here." Lily shook her head faintly. "I ran," she said. Evan didn't correct her. He simply said, "You protected each other." That was the only truth that mattered right now. When the initial care was done, and Ranger stabilized enough for transport if needed, Lily was given hot soup and a blanket of her own. She held the bowl with both hands, fingers trembling as heat seeped back into them. She took only 2 spoonfuls before pushing it away. "Ranger first," she said. Evan watched her carefully. "You haven't gone home," he said gently. "Have you?" Lily's jaw tightened. "We can't." "Why?" She hesitated. Her eyes slid to the door, to the walls, to the floor. "Because he'll be there." Evan waited. Lily's voice dropped to a whisper. "And Ranger won't be able to stop him again?" The weight of her words settled heavily into the room. Evan understood then that tonight was not an accident. It was an escape. He did not press her further, not yet. "You're safe here for now," he said instead. "Both of you." Lily nodded faintly, not in belief, but in something closer to surrender. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead gently to Ranger's. His eyes flickered open briefly, just long enough to find her, then closed again. Outside, Frost Willow continued its quiet routine beneath the snow. Inside the small station, a child and a wounded dog waited in the fragile space between before and after, while an officer stood just to the side of their lives, unknowingly stepping into them for good. Morning arrived in Frost Willow without ceremony. Snow still fell, softer now, drifting in lazy spirals that softened the sharp edges of night. The storm had passed its fiercest rage, leaving behind a town wrapped in pale quiet. The police substation glowed with tired fluorescent light, a small island of wakefulness in a city that pretended it was still asleep. Lily did not sleep. She sat curled in a vinyl chair that felt too big for her thin body, a blanket pulled up beneath her chin, her knees drawn tightly to her chest. Ranger lay on a padded mat beside her, an IV line taped gently along his foreleg, his bandages fresh and clean now. His breathing was steady but shallow, each rise and fall of his chest monitored by a small, blinking machine that Lily watched as if it were the heartbeat of the world itself. Every time his breath hitched, so did hers. Officer Evan Brooks had not gone home. He leaned against the edge of a metal desk, a mug of coffee cooling untouched in his hand. The sharp scent of disinfectant still clung to the air, layered over the faint warmth of soup and electricity. Across the room, the volunteer medic moved quietly, checking Ranger's vitals with practiced care. Evan's eyes returned again and again to the girl in the chair. In the early light, Lily looked even smaller. Without the darkness to blur her edges, the bruising beneath her bandages showed more clearly. A faint yellow-green shadow curved along her forearm. A darker mark lingered along the ridge of her collarbone, hidden only when she hunched forward. Her hair had been brushed once with borrowed hands, but the strands already escaped in nervous, uneven spirals. She watched every adult in the room with calm that felt less like peace and more like vigilance. A child should not look like this in daylight, Evan thought. At 9 years old, she should have been messy in the careless way of children. Sticky fingers, loud laughter, forgotten worries. Instead, Lily carried herself with the rigid stillness of someone who had learned that movement attracted consequences. Dr. Miriam Keller arrived shortly after sunrise. She was the town's on-call child psychologist, a woman in her early 50s with silver-threaded dark hair tied back in a practical knot, and warm brown skin weathered by years of listening. Her eyes held the kind of gentleness that came not from softness, but from strength practiced over decades. She wore a thick wool coat, still dusted with snow, and carried herself with the quiet certainty of someone who had stepped into many rooms where fear lived. Evan met her at the door and filled her in with careful, clipped precision. "She won't talk," he said. "She's terrified of going home. Dog was injured protecting her." Miriam nodded slowly. "Then we don't push," she said. "We wait." She approached Lily without urgency, her movements unthreatening, as if she were walking through deep water. She crouched a few feet away, not invading Lily's space, and let silence do some of the work. "My name is Miriam," she said. "I'm here to help kids when their stories get a little too heavy to carry alone." Lily did not respond. Her fingers tightened in the fabric of the blanket. Ranger stirred faintly at the sound of a new voice. Lily's hand instinctively reached out to touch his ear, grounding herself through his warmth. Miriam noticed. "You love him very much," she said. The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. Lily swallowed. "He's all I have," she whispered before she could stop herself. Miriam's gaze softened. "Then he's very lucky." Time passed slowly after that. No questions were forced. Miriam spoke quietly about ordinary things, the snow, the mountains, the way winter sometimes made people feel trapped even when they weren't. Lily listened without comment, eyes drifting between Ranger and the far wall. Evan pretended to read paperwork nearby, giving them space while never truly leaving. It took nearly an hour before Lily spoke again. "I didn't want to come back," she said suddenly. Miriam nodded. "To where?" Lily hesitated. Her voice shrank. "Home." The word did not sound like a place of safety on her tongue. "What makes home hard?" Miriam asked. Silence. Then one small truth slipped through the cracks. "He gets mad," Lily whispered. Evan felt the muscles in his jaw tighten. "How?" Miriam asked gently. "At things," Lily said. "At noise, at mess, at me." Her hands began to shake. "He drinks until the house smells like it," Lily continued, eyes unfocused now. "And then it's not him anymore." The room grew still. Miriam did not rush her. "When Ranger came," Lily said, "he used to yell at him too, but Ranger wouldn't run. He just stood there." Her voice fractured. "Last night, he raised his hand," she whispered. "Ranger jumped." The rest did not need to be spoken aloud. Ranger had taken the blow meant for her. Ranger had bled, so she would not. A sob broke loose from Lily's chest at last. Ragged, startled, as though even crying had been forbidden to her until now. She folded forward, clutching Ranger's bandaged leg, her face pressed into the warmth of his fur. "I didn't mean for him to get hurt," she whispered. "I didn't." Miriam gently placed one hand on Lily's shoulder. "None of this is your fault," she said. For the first time since Evan had met her, Lily cried openly. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was the quiet, exhausted kind of crying that comes after fear has lived too long in a small body with nowhere else to go. Evan stepped out of the room. The hallway felt suddenly too narrow for the anger burning up his spine. He braced both hands against the wall and closed his eyes. This was no accident. This was not a misunderstanding. This was years of silence, crystallizing in one wounded child and one dying dog. He reached for his radio. Child Protective Services was notified before the sun fully cleared the rooftops. By mid-morning, the substation hummed with quiet urgency. 2 CPS workers arrived. Sarah Lynn, a composed woman in her 30s with calm eyes and tightly braided hair, and Mark Douglas, a heavy-set man with a soft voice and a habit of kneeling when he spoke to children. They moved with the careful respect of people who knew how fragile the space between fear and trust could be. They did not wear uniforms. They did not carry authority in their voices. They carried patience. Miriam explained the situation with medical clarity and emotional restraint. Evan filled in the legal framework. The pieces began arranging themselves into something that no longer looked like coincidence. Lily was questioned gently, in fragments, never pushed beyond what she could bear to give. Each piece confirmed the same shape of truth: the father's addiction, the unpredictable violence, the long months of Lily trying to be invisible, Ranger placing himself between them again and again, the injury that finally forced escape. "This is ongoing abuse," Sarah said quietly. "Not a single incident." Evan nodded. "Then tonight saved 2 lives." No one argued. Lily was informed carefully that she would not be going home. The words should have sounded frightening. Instead, they sounded like relief. She nodded as if she had expected this outcome long before anyone else had caught up to it. Ranger was transferred later that afternoon to a veterinary unit equipped to continue his care under observation. Lily insisted on walking beside the stretcher until the doors closed. "Don't leave me," she whispered into his fur. Miriam crouched beside her. "He isn't leaving," she said. "He's just healing." Lily nodded, trusting that one sentence more than anything else in the room. As CPS completed emergency placement paperwork, Evan stood nearby, arms folded, watching the girl who had walked out of the snow and into his life before dawn. A small part of him still wanted to believe that this was the end of his involvement. A larger, quieter part of him already knew it was not. Outside, Frost Willow stirred fully awake. Cars moved along white-lined streets. Shops opened. Smoke rose from chimneys. The town went on, pretending it was an ordinary winter morning. Inside the station, the truth had finally been spoken, piece by fragile piece, and nothing about any of their lives would ever be ordinary again. The decision was made before doubt could find its footing. The small veterinary unit in Frost Willow did what it could: oxygen, pressure bandages, fluids. But the truth settled heavily into the room. Ranger's injuries went beyond what their equipment and limited surgical capacity could safely manage. Internal bleeding was suspected, the kind that hid behind steady breathing and stole life quietly. "He needs a full surgical team," the veterinarian said. "Now. The nearest hospital that can handle this is nearly 90 minutes away." Outside, the snow had not stopped. It had only grown colder. Evan did not hesitate. "I'll drive." The words left his mouth with the same certainty as a vow. Within minutes, Ranger was transferred onto a reinforced stretcher, bundled with heated packs and layered blankets. Tubes ran from his leg and chest, faint mechanical beeps tracking the fragile territory between presence and absence. Lily stood frozen beside him, her small hands trembling as they hovered uselessly in the air, afraid to touch, afraid not to. "You can sit with him in the back," the vet said quietly. Lily looked to Evan as if permission were something she no longer trusted the world to give. Evan nodded once. "You're not leaving him." That was all the answer she needed. The patrol car became an ambulance in spirit, if not in name. Evan drove, knuckles white against the wheel, eyes locked onto the narrow ribbon of road carved through snow and shadow. The storm deepened as they climbed out of Frost Willow, the town shrinking into a scattering of yellow lights behind them before vanishing entirely. Inside the back seat, Lily pressed her palm against Ranger's ribcage, feeling for movement, counting breaths, whispering his name like a spell stitched together from desperation and faith. Her breath fogged the window in trembling circles. "Stay with me," she murmured. "You promised." Ranger did not move, but the machine beside him answered for him, its soft beeping steady as a heartbeat learned from borrowed time. The highway was nearly empty. The snow came sideways now, driven by wind off the ridge. Headlights clawed through white curtains that refused to part. The wipers beat a frantic rhythm that matched Evan's pulse. At one point, the tires slipped. The cruiser fishtailed slightly, then caught again. Evan did not slow. Behind him, Lily gasped. "I won't let you die in the dark," he whispered, not just to Ranger, but to the idea of loss itself, the old companion he had carried quietly for years. The memory of another hospital corridor flickered faintly at the edge of his thoughts. Another waiting room, another moment when hope had not arrived in time. He pushed the thought away. Not tonight. Not again. 90 minutes stretched into something that no longer resembled time. It became tension. It became counting. It became breath and road, and the strange, unreal feeling that the world had, narrowed to a single living question in the back seat. When the lights of the city finally appeared, wide, tall, impossible in scale compared to Frost Willow's quiet streets, Lily let out a sound somewhere between a sob and a prayer. The emergency veterinary hospital rose from the snow like a fortress of glass and steel. They rushed Ranger inside beneath blinding white lights. Lily tried to follow. "We need to prepare him now," the surgeon said gently but firmly. "You'll have to wait here." Her hands clutched Ranger's fur one last time. "Don't go," she whispered. The surgeon peeled her fingers free with infinite care. Ranger disappeared through double doors that closed with a sound far too final for something that was not meant to be an ending. Lily collapsed into the nearest chair. The waiting room was too clean, too bright, too quiet in a way that made every sound feel louder. A clock ticked on the wall with merciless clarity. Evan sat beside her, his uniform damp with melted snow, his hands useless in his lap. He had stood unshaken in blizzards, in domestic calls thick with anger, in roadsides layered with glass and blood. But this was different, because this time, he could not act. He could only wait. Minutes fell, then hours. Lily did not move. She did not cry. She stared at the door as if her gaze alone might keep it from swallowing any more of the world she trusted. Evan rose once to pace, then sat again, restless as a tethered storm. At some point, without knowing when or why, his hands folded together. He bowed his head. He had not prayed in years, not since he learned that prayers did not always choose the right address. But in that sterile waiting room, with a child who had already lost too much and a dog who had bled to protect her, the old words returned not as belief, but as need. "Please," he whispered into the space beneath his breath. "Not him," Lily noticed. She did not ask what he was doing. She simply leaned against his arm. The surgery stretched deep into the night. Inside the operating room, hands moved quickly and precisely. Blood was replaced, tissue repaired. A body held steady on the narrow bridge between now and never. Outside, hope grew thin. At one point, a nurse stepped into the waiting room. Evan and Lily rose at the same time. "Not yet," she said gently. "He's still in surgery." Lily nodded, sinking back into her chair without a word. Her strength was ebbing. Fear had taken too much of it already. The second time the doors opened, the surgeon walked out alone. He was a tall man with graying hair and eyes ringed with fatigue. His mask hung loose at his neck. Evan stood. Lily stood. The world seemed to tilt toward his face. "He lost a lot of blood," the surgeon said. "We managed to repair the worst of the internal damage. The next 12 hours will be critical." Lily held her breath. "But," he continued, "he made it through the surgery." The words fell into the room like light through storm clouds. Lily did not speak. She broke. The sound that tore from her chest was raw and unguarded and utterly unlike the careful silence she had lived inside for so long. Tears shook her small frame as she folded forward into Evan's side, sobbing as though every uncried tear of the past year had waited for this exact moment to be released. "He's alive," she whispered again and again, as if repeating it might anchor it more firmly into reality. Evan closed his eyes. His breath left him in a rush that trembled with relief. Alive. The word felt impossibly heavy and impossibly light at the same time. They were allowed to see Ranger briefly. He lay unconscious beneath warm lights, wrapped in clean bandages, his chest rising and falling with measured assistance from machines. The fierce warrior, who had once braced himself against a grown man, now looked impossibly small within the boundaries of care. Lily reached out with one trembling finger and touched the edge of his ear. "Rest," she whispered. "I'll be right here." Ranger did not stir, but his heart, steady and stubborn, answered her all the same. Beyond the windows of the hospital, snow continued to fall across the sleeping city. Inside, something fragile and extraordinary had survived the night. And for the first time in years, Lily cried not from fear, but from the simple, breathtaking relief of hope. Morning crept into the city hospital like a cautious visitor, light slipping through tall glass panels and pale ribbons. Snow still drifted beyond the windows, gentle now, as if the storm had spent its fury and left only quiet in its wake. In the recovery wing of the veterinary hospital, machines hummed softly, a steady mechanical lullaby that marked the difference between waiting and beginning again. Ranger lay unmoving beneath layers of clean white bandages, his powerful body reduced to careful stillness by anesthesia and healing. His chest rose and fell with slow, measured rhythm, aided by wires and silent patience. Lily sat beside him in a chair far too large for her, legs tucked beneath her, both hands folded in her lap, as if she were afraid that touching the air too roughly might wake pain instead of life. She had not slept. Every time her eyes closed, the world tried to take him away again. Officer Evan Brooks stood a few feet behind her, his reflection faint in the glass that separated the waiting area from the recovery room. The city had offered him a shower, fresh clothes, a place to rest. He had declined all of it. The scent of snow and road still clung to his coat. He wore fatigue the way some men wore scars, quietly, without complaint, as if it were simply another layer of his uniform. Dr. Patel, the lead veterinarian who had performed Ranger's surgery, stepped into the hallway with calm authority. He was a man in his late 40s with careful hands and eyes that balanced science and compassion with practiced ease. "The bleeding has stabilized," he said. "The next 24 hours are still critical, but he's holding." Lily's breath left her in a silent rush. Evan nodded once, absorbing the words as if they were law carved into stone. Hope had rules now. It could exist, but only with caution. Later that morning, Child Protective Services arrived again. Sarah Lynn and Mark Douglas entered the hospital quietly, their presence carrying a different kind of gravity than uniforms or sirens ever could. Sarah's posture was composed, her dark blazer neat against the sterile brightness of the corridor. Mark carried a folder tucked under his arm and spoke with his usual careful warmth. They had come not as visitors, but as witnesses. "Is she awake?" Sarah asked. "She hasn't slept," Evan replied, "but she's steady." They approached Lily slowly. Sarah knelt so that her eyes met Lily's, without forcing the angle. "We're here to make sure you're safe," she said gently. "For as long as it takes." Lily did not answer at first. Her gaze moved briefly to Ranger, then back to Sarah. "I can stay with him?" she asked in a small voice. Mark nodded. "We'll do everything we can." That promise became the axis on which the next decisions turned. The court moved faster than Lily could have imagined. Emergency cases always did. By afternoon, a judge reviewed the report, medical evaluations, Miriam's psychological assessment, Evan's official statement, the bruises that told their own quiet truth. The pattern was clear. The danger was not theoretical. It was immediate. The ruling arrived by fax and phone call nearly at the same time. An emergency protective order was issued. Lily would not be returning home. Her father was ordered into investigation and mandatory psychological evaluation. His access suspended without exception. The law, often slow and uneven, had spoken with rare swiftness. Sarah explained it gently to Lily, choosing each word with care. "You're safe now," she said. "No one can force you to go back there." Lily listened without visible reaction. For a long moment, it seemed the words had not reached her at all. Then her shoulders loosened slightly, as though she had been holding a breath for years and had only just been given permission to release it. "Ranger?" she asked again. "Ranger 2, Sarah assured her. The question of where Lily would go next remained. Emergency foster placement was arranged on paper with practiced efficiency. Names were prepared, backgrounds checked, beds available. The machinery of protection turned smoothly. Too smoothly for a child whose trust had been worn thin by promises that never stayed. When Sarah explained that Lily would need to be transferred to a temporary shelter that night, Lily said nothing. She merely shook her head once and reached for Ranger's bandaged paw. "I won't go," she whispered. Evan felt the words strike him with unexpected force. "He needs me." The medical staff hesitated. The rules did not bend easily around emotion. Children were not meant to remain in hospitals indefinitely, and animals in recovery required quiet conditions. Dr. Patel studied Lily for a long moment, his eyes moving from her steady hands to the soft rise and fall of Ranger's chest. "She's anchored to him," he said quietly, "and right now, he's anchored to her." The room fell silent. Then, with a slow nod that carried more weight than most approvals, he added, "She can remain here during his initial recovery, under supervision." Relief moved through Lily in a trembling wave. She bowed her forehead gently to Ranger's fur, as if sealing the permission with gratitude rather than words. CPS adjusted the paperwork. Temporary arrangements were made, but another problem remained. When Ranger recovered, Lily could not remain in the hospital forever. Someone would have to take her. That was when Sarah turned slowly toward Evan. He felt the shift in the room before she spoke. "You've been with her since the beginning," she said carefully. "She trusts you." Trust. The word felt too heavy for what he had done, too large for simply turning a car around in the snow. "She won't respond to the shelter placements," Mark added gently. "She shuts down completely when we separate her from you and the dog." "I'm not," Evan began. "A family member," Sarah finished for him. "We know." She drew a quiet breath. "But we'd like to propose you as a temporary guardian while we continue long-term placement review." The words hovered in the air between them. Temporary guardian. Evan stared at the floor. The weight of responsibility pressed into his chest like an old memory returning with unfamiliar urgency. He had learned, long ago, to keep his life contained, simple, predictable, unentangled. Children unmade that kind of life. "I don't think I'm the right person," he said quietly. Sarah did not argue. "We're not asking you to be permanent," she said. "We're asking you to be stable." Stable. Evan glanced at Lily. She watched him now with frightening intensity, not pleading, not bargaining, just watching, as if her future were a fragile object, balanced on the edge of his answer. He saw in her expression not expectation, but something far more dangerous. Hope. "I work long hours," he said. "We'll adjust support," Sarah answered. "I live above a laundromat." "I've placed children in worse and in better," she replied evenly. "What matters is safety." He exhaled slowly. "I've never done this before." Mark gave a faint, understanding smile. "Neither has she," he said. Silence stretched. In that silence lived every excuse Evan had used to keep his world narrow and controllable. It also held every reason those excuses no longer seemed strong enough. He knelt in front of Lily. Her eyes did not leave his. "This wouldn't be forever," he said carefully. "It would just be for now, until things settle." Lily hesitated only a second. She nodded. That was all. The paperwork was drawn up that evening. Signatures lined the bottom of forms that restructured the next chapter of all their lives. Evan held the pen for a long moment before he wrote his name. The letters felt heavier than his badge. When he finished, he did not look at the page immediately. He looked at Lily instead. She stood beside Ranger's recovery bed, her small hand resting gently on the bandage that wrapped his leg, her eyes no longer empty with waiting, but full of something that had not lived in them for a very long time. Belonging, tentative, fragile, but real. Dr. Patel watched the exchange quietly from the doorway. "Recovery will be slow," he said, "for both of them." Evan nodded. "We'll take it slow." Outside the hospital windows, the city continued as it always had. Cars passing, lights changing, snow drifting down in patient surrender. The law had spoken, protection had been drawn. And somewhere beneath the procedural language and stamped documents, 3 wounded lives had been bound together by something the court could not fully define. Not yet. 1 year passed the way winter rivers do, quiet on the surface, relentless underneath. Frost willow changed its seasons with the same quiet dignity it always had. Snow melted into slush, slush into memory. Pine trees shed their white crowns. Windows opened. Children returned to sidewalks. Life, stubborn and persistent, reclaimed its spaces. Inside a small blue house at the edge of town, Lily learned how to breathe again without counting. She was 10 now, still slender, still soft-spoken, but her eyes no longer flinched at the sound of doors. Her hair had grown longer, brushed neatly every morning, with hands that no longer trembled. The scars on her leg had faded into pale lines beneath the skin, reminders that no longer ruled her steps. She went to school. Every day. At first she had walked through the doors like someone entering foreign territory, shoulders tight, senses sharp, waiting for the moment the world would demand payment for peace. The teachers spoke gently. The children stared, then stopped staring. One girl offered her a seat. A boy shared a pencil. Lily learned that nothing terrible followed. It took months for her to believe it. At the same time, Ranger learned how to run again. The recovery had been slow, measured in careful steps and controlled movements. His once massive strength returned in layers, not all at once. The veterinary team had warned Evan that full recovery would depend not only on physical healing, but on emotional steadiness. They underestimated the power of Lily's presence. Every exercise session began with her voice. Every difficult moment ended with her hand resting against his fur. When Ranger finally sprinted across Frost Willow's small training field for the first time, muscles stretching freely beneath his coat, breath steady and strong, Lily had cried harder than she did the night he survived surgery. But those were not tears of fear. They were tears of return. Ranger did not return as he was before. He returned as something more. After long observation and evaluation, the veterinary and behavioral teams officially certified him as a trauma support and therapy dog for children recovering from abuse and emotional shock. His instincts, once forged in survival, had become tools of healing. He knew when to press against shaking knees. He knew when to sit quietly at a distance. He knew when to rest his head in a lap and wait without demand. Children trusted him the way they trusted sunlight after storms. And Lily, who once needed his body as a shield, now watched him offer safety to others. Evan Brooks changed too. His apartment above the laundromat was no longer silent. It carried the quiet sound of life. Footsteps in the hallway, a school backpack dropped near the door, Ranger's steady breathing at the foot of the couch. Mornings became earlier, dinners became slower. The tiny kitchen learned the rhythm of shared meals instead of solitary exhaustion. Evan learned how to pack lunches, poorly at first. The first week, Lily found nothing but crackers and 2 mismatched apples in her bag. She had laughed, actually laughed. The sound startled them both. He learned how to listen when words were scarce. He learned how to sit through nightmares without trying to fix them. He learned that healing did not move in straight lines. Some days Lily was bright and brave and curious. Some days she went quiet without explanation. He learned that both were allowed. The court process moved with deliberate slowness. Permanent placement reviews, psychological evaluations, home inspections, school reports, veterinary progress updates. All the machinery of long-term protection unfolded one form at a time. Throughout it all, Lily never once asked Evan what would happen if the court said no. She only asked if Ranger would still sleep in the hallway. The answer never changed. A year after the night in the snow, the final hearing arrived. The courtroom in Frost Willow was small, wood-paneled walls polished by decades of quiet decisions. The air felt heavier than it should have been for such a simple room. Lily sat between Evan and Sarah Lynn. She wore a pale blue dress her teacher had helped her pick. Ranger lay at her feet, wearing a simple service harness, his posture calm, steady, unshakable. The judge reviewed the case in careful tones. 1 year of stable care, full recovery of the animal, documented improvement of the child, successful home assessments, psychological clearance, educational progress. Every sentence pressed gently into a future, being assembled one measured word at a time. Evan stood when instructed. His hands did not shake, Lily's did. The final ruling was delivered without ceremony. Permanent legal adoption is granted. The words did not echo, they settled. Lily blinked. Once, twice. She did not move. Evan knelt beside her, his voice barely steady. "It's official," he said quietly. "You're home." Something inside Lily loosened. She turned slowly toward him. Her voice came out small, uncertain, and entirely new. "Dad?" The word trembled as it crossed the space between them. Evan did not answer immediately. His breath caught. His chest tightened. He had not imagined this word would ever be spoken to him again in this lifetime. He nodded once. "Yes," he said. "I'm here." Ranger lifted his head. His tail thumped gently once against the courthouse floor. Lily smiled fully for the first time in front of strangers. That afternoon, Frost Willow received one of its quiet miracles. Snow fell again that evening, but this time it was gentle. Not the cutting storm of escape, not the white wall of terror. It fell the way blessings fall, softly, without demand. Evan stood in the small front yard of their home, watching Lily build uneven snow shapes near Ranger's paws. The dog ran slow circles around her, careful not to knock her down, his joy measured in control and devotion. Lily looked up suddenly. "Dad!" she called again, just to see if the word still stayed where she put it. "Yes?" She grinned. "He's chasing the snow." Ranger barked once, sprinted forward, skidded dramatically, and landed in a clumsy tumble of paws and fur. Lily laughed so hard she dropped into the snow. Ranger pounced playfully beside her, coating both of them in white. Evan shook his head, smiling. Inside the house, 3 sets of footprints slowly vanished beneath the falling snow. But none of the paths they had walked to reach this moment would ever disappear. Not the grocery store, not the streetlight, not the surgery, not the courtroom. They would remain, etched into memory not as wounds, but as bridges. And in the quiet center of that winter evening, with snow drifting lazily from the dark sky, Lily stood between a man who chose her and a dog who once bled for her. The snow had not stopped falling outside, but inside her heart, it finally had. This story reminds us that the miracles of God do not always arrive with thunder or bright signs. Sometimes they come quietly through the loyalty of a wounded dog, the courage of a frightened child, and the kindness of a stranger who chooses to stop instead of turning away. In our daily lives, we may think our small actions do not matter, but to God, every act of love is a seed of transformation. Someone listening today may feel lost, afraid, or forgotten, just like Lily once was. But remember, God never abandons the broken. He sends help in ways we least expect. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment with the word Amen if you believe in God's miracles. And do not forget to press subscribe to support this channel so we can continue spreading stories of faith, love, and healing. May God bless every one of you and your families always.